This episode is brought to you by Spartan Combat. Spartan Combat just came out with the Spartan Dake 001, which is the Kyle Dake custom wrestling shoe. It's not available for purchase yet, but if you go to SpartanCombat.com, you can enter to win a pair of Kyle Dake Spartan Combat wrestling shoes. Go to SpartanCombat.com and click Enter to Win on the homepage. Now let's get to this interview of Wrestling Changed My Life.
We can endure anything and adapt and pivot and change. Wrestling gave us that ability.
I would say nothing in life has impacted me more than the things wrestling has taught me in terms of self-reflection, resilience.
Toughness. Some guys have it, some guys don't.
Adversity, 100%. How to pick myself up and be a man after I failed.
And everything that has shaped my life and where I'm at today would not be there without the values and basically the lessons I've learned through the sport of wrestling.
For me, wrestling saved my life because it allowed me to focus and channel my energy.
We're fortunate if you wrestle, because if you wrestle, natural talent helps, but it's 5% of the ingredient. It pales in comparison to heart and technique and effort.
It humbled me, taught me humility. Nothing can humble you more than wrestling. I think it's the learning to adapt, right? You learn how to adapt, you learn how to solve problems.
You know, if I look back at my time I spent wrestling, if it gave me one thing more than anything else, it's mental toughness.
Wrestling fans, welcome back to the Wrestling Changed My Life podcast. This is your host, Ryan Warner. It's been far too long. I apologize for the break-in episodes. I got married over the weekend. And we also had an issue on Apple Podcasts where our updated episode wasn't going out. So if you listen on Spotify, you saw an episode more recently. And if you only listen on Apple Podcasts, it's been over 2 weeks, which is unacceptable, folks. So I apologize. We have an episode today. Then we have an episode tomorrow going live with Troy Nickerson. And then an episode on Friday going live with Kevin Dresser. So we're going to have a ton of content coming this week. But let's get to today's episode. This one is a unique one. It's with a professor and a student at UConn. And what happened was last week, a video went viral on Twitter of a professor wrestling a student in a controlled manner. You could tell these guys knew what they were doing. And it got 1.7 million views. And so we have the professor, Ryan Coles, a former wrestler who's a PhD from Cornell and the professor at UConn, and his student, Martial Sutton, who is a former wrestler himself and is a junior in college. They're our guests today. We talk about the infamous match and also how wrestling impacted their life. So I hope you enjoy it. Tune in tomorrow for our full interview with Troy Nickerson, and then on Friday with Kevin Dresser. Fan of the Week goes to a recent Apple Podcast review. WX Beaver is the reviewer. The title is Keeps on Giving. Wrestling Changed My Life just keeps pumping out great podcasts. Whether you're an ex-wrestler or not, this podcast is great content for anyone who loves sports and competition. Thank you so much for the review, and thanks to everyone who's left an Apple Podcast review. Now, without further ado, folks, let's get to this episode with Professor Ryan Coles and student Martial Sutton. Peace! Okay, folks, we're here with Ryan and Martial. Ryan is the professor who, on this video we're going to link in the chat, was leading class and gets into a controlled scrum with Martial here. So, gentlemen, go ahead and introduce yourselves. Ryan, why don't you start?
Sure. I'm Ryan Coles. I'm a professor of entrepreneurship. And yeah, I indeed was that professor.
Martial?
Yeah, I'm Martial Sutton. I'm the wrestler in the video, and I'm a junior year at UConn, and I'm on the club wrestling team here.
I love it. So, for our listeners who aren't on social media, last week a video broke off, has about 1.7 million views of a student wrestling a teacher in beautiful suspenders in a classroom.
I appreciate that.
And
I'll take my word for that. Yeah.
Any wrestler watching this knows that, okay, both these guys know what they're doing. Marshall's on the outside, peppering in some action. Professor Coles is holding position. And so this goes on for about 20 seconds. And it's just awesome because you can tell both of you guys are wrestlers. And then I see that Nashawn Garrett, who's been on the podcast, he tweets out that he knows Professor Cole. So let's just start, with talk to us like 5 minutes before this happened. How did this lead off, and how did we get to this?
Marshall, do you want to start from your perspective, what happened before it happened, or should I give my perspective first?
Yeah, I could go first. Basically it was a regular Tuesday in class where I walk in and like I see Ryan up front, like, hey Ryan, what's up? He looks up from his desk and it gives me a little nod, like, Marshall, are we doing this today? I'm like, what? He's like, the match. I'm like, I guess so. Like, just let me know when you're ready. I'm like, okay. So like I go sit down, like we're getting ready for class, and then like Ryan like gets on his computer, puts on the Metallica, grabs the microphone, and is like, Martial Sutton, come down here. We got a match that we need to have.
So Ryan, I'll add a little background here. So Marshall has a twin brother, Parker, who's also a really great wrestler. They're both wrestling at UConn. And I had his brother in my class in the spring. And I wrestled Parker, similar in front of the class. And so I knew Marshall coming in, I was like, is this going to be like family honor? Is he going to want revenge? Is he going to want to, also give it a shot? So I add that tidbit in there saying, there's a bit of a history here,
So this was discussed before, because the school year just started. So when did this concept that you guys might do a little takedown go in the classroom begin?
I think when Marshall, I think it was as soon as you enrolled in the class, you let me know, and then you'd mentioned like we got to wrestle because you knew Parker and I did, right?
Yeah, that's basically how it was. We kind of talked about practice last spring. We were kind of talking about like, maybe I'll enroll in the class and we could have a match someday there. And then I did enroll, and then it was actually like the Monday, the first day of the school, when I went and visited Ryan at his office, and we were just like talking, like, yeah, like what day in class are we gonna have the match? Like,
you want to do it?
Yeah.
So this is awesome. So the match starts. What are people saying to you guys after the fact? Do they think you're absolute lunatics, or do they know something's going down?
Well, I don't think the class knew at all what was going to happen when I cranked up Sandman Metallica and said, let's, and I called out Marshall. So keep in mind
exactly what was going on.
You knew it was like, and keep in mind, I know someone tweeted like camera turns and like classroom is empty. It was a packed house. We have 138 students, and that's fire capacity in the classroom. And so there was a lot of like, like, whoa. And I remember, Marshall, do you remember this? So we stopped, right? And you can see in the video, we end up arms around each other's shoulders, right? Because it's a fun match. We did it for fun. And I remember looking up, and there were probably like 20 phones out.
Oh, yeah. There was like,
oh my God.
I was pretty focused on the match, but like afterwards, like we look up, there's phones everywhere. And then like throughout the day, I had people like reaching out to me like, hey, like, I just saw a wrestling match on somebody's like story. Like, was that you by any chance? I'm like, yeah.
On my perspective, I remember seeing, from my end, I remember seeing the phones, and I did start to get a little bit of a pit in my stomach. And I thought, oh boy, this is going to get posted. And what's going to happen? And I walked back to my office, and similar to Marshall, my phone was already blowing up.
Yeah.
Now, did the one last spring with Marshall's twin brother, did anyone record that and post that?
So it must have not been posted. It was recorded.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I remember seeing it like recorded, but it didn't like nobody sent it to like UConn Barstool or anything like that. So
and nothing really happened. So I thought, why not? Let's do it again.
Wow.
Marshall was down. Like I said, I don't know if it was like, all right, Marshall wants to show his twin brother who's the better wrestler,
Well, it's funny you say that about the music, because the first time I watched it, I'm like, did someone dub this music onto this video to make it like a thematic or some cinematic? I'm like, but now it's in my head. I'm like, oh, that's from the classroom music. That was like legit what was going on.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about you, but in my wrestling career, I was in high school in the early 2000s, right? And then did NCAA wrestling through college. And that was just the wrestling song for us.
Yeah.
That was the go-to. Sandman, Metallica, of course,
For us, it's Thunderstruck, where I grew up. You hear Thunderstruck? I just got married this last week. And if you hear Thunderstruck, everyone from my high school stops what they're doing. And it's like, you're going back to the glory days.
Yes.
Now let's talk a little bit about your guys' backgrounds in wrestling, because it's again, just from watching it, it's like you guys have wrestled before. So, Professor Coles, we'll start with you. I read in your bio, even your professional bio, you have avid wrestler. So, tell us about your background.
So, wrestling was a family sport. My grandpa wrestled, my dad, my uncle, my cousins, my brothers, and everyone followed it. And so I started wrestling from a young age. I think I started at 7 years old. I started wrestling with John Esvito. He was my coach at the time at Calvary Chapel. They had a kids club. Mm-hmm. And we loved it. And I remember I started wrestling with the Frostsoft high school team in 7th grade because we knew the head coach really well. And it was a blast. And, I planned to do NCAA wrestling in college, but unfortunately BYU cut their program, typical story. So we launched a club program in NCAAs. And I know we were top 25 in Division I NCAA that first year. And I think we got as high as top 5. And it was a solid, kind of club program. But unfortunately, again, a few years ago, they cut it.
The club?
We don't know why. The club was self-funded. And again, I think this is that kind of classic issue we have with our sport, right? It seems it seems sometimes the athletic world is biased towards, different sports, but they cut our club. BYU did just a few years ago. Again, we were self-funded, but so we're still figuring that decision out. But anyway, I continued club wrestling. I got back into it when I started my master's and PhD at Cornell, just because it was a nice way to keep moving and get through the stressors of a doctorate degree. And then through that, I got to know a lot of the wrestlers on the D1 team, the NC2A team, like Nishan, Kyle, and Gabe, and Bob Kroll was a fabulous person. So
Gabe Dean is one of all those guys you mentioned are awesome, but Gabe Dean is just the nicest, coolest dude, man.
Yes.
Yeah, no. So, okay. So that's awesome. And we've actually had some folks on before. I know one for sure who started the USC club program, Nick Selgelski. And so I was starting to learn a little bit about that. So basically the club program is, like you said, self-funded. You guys are going to opens, but there is qualifiers and there's a national tournament. And so you were doing that at BYU. And so, Marshall, is that what you're doing now at UConn? Do they have a club program at UConn?
Yeah, I wrestle for the UConn club team, and we're in the NCAA. So it's super fun, super competitive. We don't just only wrestle club teams here. We also wrestle some D2, some D3 teams. So it's still pretty competitive, yeah.
And what's your background? Did you grow up wrestling all through middle school, high school, or?
Yeah, so I started wrestling when I was 7 years old, and I feel like honestly I could have started sooner. It was kind of like my parents chose when to put me and my brother into it. My dad wrestled a little bit in high school, and then he actually wrestled at Roger Williams in Rhode Island, and he was part of the first team there ever. So he in 7th grade, not 7th grade, 7 years old, he kind of threw me and my brother into it, and I automatically loved it so much. So throughout as I got older, then I was eventually going to I joined like a specific like wrestling club team, not just like my town's program.
Mm-hmm.
And then like had some success in high school with it. And then I was like, oh, I still love it. I might as well still do it at UConn.
Dude, that's awesome. I love that you guys are still you especially still involved with it. And so when you think about, so you guys have wrestling background, you think about this experiment in class, Professor Coles, what's like the takeaway for this for the students? Is this just to get people to pay attention and get them excited, or is there some hidden meaning here that we're not seeing?
Okay. Well, so, yeah, that's right. Well, I'll say two things. So first, directly to entrepreneurship. What was nice was before this happened in my class, I talked about two things. One was creativity, because it takes some creativity to start a business. And so we talk about what kind of foments creativity. And one of the things we talked about was play. Being playful, playing around, having fun helps you be more creative. And then another concept we talked about was the importance of social networks for starting businesses, right? Our network ties are ways in which we can bring resources to the table to build a business, get the people that we need, organize, get the marketing that we need. And so what was interesting about it is, it happened on a Tuesday, and then by Thursday, we were already at like 1.5 million views on Twitter.
Yeah.
I think Kurt Angle had already retweeted by then. And so what was cool is to come back in class and bring those two concepts to the students and say, here's what's happened, right? It's gotten all this attention. Sports Center, commented on it. And I said, this happened right before your eyes. We talked about the importance of play for creativity, the importance of social networks for creating value. And you saw that, right? Marshall and I had some fun wrestling. Someone in our social network, right? Someone in our class videoed it, sent it out, and we created some value for millions of people. And that is fundamentally part and parcel of entrepreneurship and creating value. And so it was actually really neat as a kind of in your face happening learning moment. And then I'll just say one more thing real quick. For me, if you can connect with students and come into their world, right? And I don't think a lot of professors do this, but show them that you're interested in what's interesting to them, they're going to be more excited to pay attention to what you're talking about because they feel a genuine connection with you. And, in this case, right, for Marshall and I, for Parker and I, and there's 2 or 3 other wrestlers in my class, like wrestling is one area where we can connect. Mm-hmm. And I think that's important. I'm not saying every professor is to go wrestle their students, but to go that extra mile, I think is important. Yeah, no, especially because that's your genuine interest, is wrestling anyway. Yeah. And so if you played the violin, you'd be connecting with students who play the violin in a different way. Right. So, no, it's cool because, entrepreneurship's a really cool topic. And Professor, I've read about some of the things you've done in Syria and Egypt and Mexico. And I'd love to talk a little bit about that before we let you go. Sure. But I'm just curious, Marshall, did you get into this class because your brother was in it and Professor Coles is cool? Or are you looking to start some businesses or anything in particular come to mind?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely helped that my brother took the class before me, and he was like, oh, you need to take this class. And then I met Ryan. He's like, yeah, you should take my class. But I'm also really interested in business management and entrepreneurship and stuff like that. So Ryan's class is definitely amazing for learning about that.
Now, before we go back to Professor Coles, I gotta know, did he give you any kind of different feel you weren't expecting? What did he feel like in there with the tie-up? Was it a strong stance? What were we expecting there?
Based on prior information from my brother from wrestling him the year before, I already knew he was pretty strong. As soon as I tied up with him, I was like, damn, he's probably got 40 pounds on me right now. But, I battled, almost got the takedown, but it didn't work out.
I like the motion you had going. Yeah, because Professor Coles has a real solid stance. You can tell and stays in good position. You're on the outside, kind of like a John Smith darting in. And like you said, man, you were in on that shot. You guys go into the into the projector board a little bit, and then
Yeah.
Professor
we
Cole's.
we didn't hit any desks though, so it's all
No.
good.
Yeah. I loved on TikTok, they actually said, like, these are professionals engaging in this activity. So it's like, I'll tell you, I underestimated how fast Marshall was. He's fast when he took those shots. And it was really a fun scramble because, like you said, Ryan, we went off screen a bit there from that angle, but it was a really fun scramble. It was good.
Yeah. Well, it's cool. You know, we're joking around about it, but I think Professor Coles, it's awesome that, someone like you, who's such an advocate for wrestling's out there, doing your good deed with your day job, but also promote wrestling. And, Marshall, I'm sure you realize this as you go through college and even business, having the wrestling background, ton of entrepreneurs, who used to wrestle do well there, because of the work ethic, because of the, the discipline. So, I mean, both of you guys are cool examples for wrestling, and, not typically folks we'd have on the podcast. So it's an awesome chance to kind of take a step back from some of the guys we normally have on and show a different way where wrestling has changed lives. The name of this podcast is Wrestling Changed My Life. So I'd love to hear both you guys answer that. But before we do, Professor Coles, like I said, you've been to Syria, you've been to Egypt, you've been to Mexico. What's one trip that stuck out, and how have you used that now for your current role?
Yeah, and this could probably tie into Wrestling Changed My Life a bit. So I think there's if I can, I'll highlight two real quick. I've got this weird specialty where I specialize in businesses in extreme contexts. And so I think two real quick ones that I'll highlight is working with Syrian refugees in Jordan, coming from that intense experience, the civil war and the violence. And after seeing everything they've gone through and all the trauma that they're carrying, to have the opportunity to work with them and think of how can we help you guys create economic livelihoods. We talk a lot in the press when we highlight entrepreneurship about the tech unicorns in Silicon Valley, and they'll talk about how hard it is and disruption and dealing with uncertainty in terms of market uncertainty. But this is like next level, right? Because the uncertainty that these people are dealing with isn't just market uncertainty, it's life uncertainty. And how do you start and build a business with that type of uncertainty? And so it was both humbling and really rewarding. And the other one I'll talk about is it came across my desk because you kind of, in academia, you get your reputation for what you specialize in. And so I got a weird phone call one day from a person who wanted my help with a yak cheese factory in a remote village in the Himalayas at 18,000 feet. So to give some context, the highest point in the continental US is 14,000 feet.
Yeah.
And so the job was, we had to hike 6 days through the Himalayas. It looked like Mars and snow up there. And I mean, it's like this steep. And I had to hike 6 days to get there, just to get to the yak cheese factory, work with them and come back. And that's, one area where, I mean, for those of us that have wrestled, we have done stadium carries, right? We have cut weight. We've dealt with little food and having to go hard with little to no energy in intense situations. And that's one of those, I mean, like, I can't do the job that I do running around deserts in the Middle East or hiking through the Himalayas to get to these remote areas and help people around the world have better economic livelihoods if I didn't have that discipline, right? If I didn't know how to go hard, right? And give it all you have when there's nothing in the tank, right? Because my job literally still requires it. But those were two kind of experiences. And my motivation is really just helping people around the world have better economic livelihoods.
It's awesome. It's a powerful mission. I got to ask, when you're up that high, what kind of headaches are you getting? Because I go out to Breckenridge for a long weekend and I can't even, I have a headache the entire time.
Oh, certainly. It's so altitude sickness pills help. And so I had like my biohacking routine. I'd wake up at 6 a.m. You take your first altitude sickness pills, a couple of caffeine pills, and I ran on Snickers and water and coffee. And then you take your other altitude pill at the end of the day, because without that, I would faint. I'd never been up anywhere near that high.
Yeah.
Right. And like you said, out here in the Northeast, it's not like I could train for it before I went. I was just going off of sheer, I wrestle, I'm in shape, and I'm going to take altitude sickness. Yeah, you just get it done. Because it's do or die out there. It really is.
Well, it's cool that you get to see all these experiences and do this stuff through academia. You might often think of it like being in an office or being in a library, and because kind of head in the books, but you're out there in the field. And man, I wish that the Iranians spoke Arabic. So I know you're fluent in Arabic. We could take a couple trips, do some interviews with the Iranian wrestlers, but of course they don't speak Arabic there. But it's cool to go ahead.
Yeah, no, I'd say I'd happily do it. We'll just find. I bet I could find someone to help translate for us.
Exactly.
That'd be a blast. Yeah.
Well, the last thing we always ask our guests is, how did wrestling change your life? And Marshall, you're still a young guy in the trenches coming up, but and I'd love to hear your answer. But Professor Coles, you've been through some real shit. I mean, to be a PhD from Cornell is no joke, and to be a professor at the level of institution you are takes some real mastery. So how has wrestling helped you in your pursuit of getting to where you've gotten?
Yeah, and I hinted at it earlier. There's something unique about wrestling in terms of teaching you to focus. And like I said, give it your all when there's nothing left in the tank. Mm-hmm. Other sports, you're not having to cut weight, maintain a certain weight, right? Reduce the number of calories you're eating, and then you have to go out there and perform, right? I mean, all of us experience almost every tournament having to give everything you have with nothing in the tank. Mm-hmm. And that's a big part of life. And, Ryan, you talked about it earlier about how so many wrestlers are entrepreneurs. And when you look at the research on why some startups succeed and others don't, it's because that entrepreneur was willing to persist with the business even when there was no money, and that it eventually caught on, right? And you make some money. And I think wrestlers, because of we're used to that. We're used to having to go and keep going when there's nothing left. Mm-hmm. And being able to translate that into other areas of our life. For me, it was, having a wife and 2 kids, and doing a PhD, you're not paid anything. And having to hustle, stay on top of research, and go when there's nothing in the tank. Or, mm-hmm. My buddies and I have a startup now. We're looking at having almost $1 million in revenue in the next few years in the fintech area. But that's another instances where it's just having to go when there's nothing left in the tank. And I owe all of that to wrestling. I owe being able to go to these extreme areas to wrestling, because it taught me about staying in shape. I value staying in shape, and I couldn't go to these extreme areas without having wrestled. In terms of the lifestyle it taught me. Yeah. So I credit so much to what I do to wrestling, and it's my sense of community to this day. I showed up when we moved here, and Chris, so I'm the faculty advisor to the wrestling club at UConn, and Chris is the head coach. And I arrived here, I didn't know anyone. When at the time, it was now 3 kids, and Chris showed up and helped us unpack the U-Haul. Wow. Right. And that's the community that wrestling is. It's a strong community. So it's still a strong sense of community for me today, that you could go, like me, to any state. I'm from California. I'm 3,000 miles away from my family. So to be able to show up and have no one to help me and my wife unload when we have a 1-year-old, and that the wrestler showed up first, was really special. And it says a lot about our sport. Yeah, it's the wrestlers roll deep, and the relationships you have through that, almost as important as the individual lessons. Marshall, we'll wind down with you, my friend. You're a young man, like you said. You're still in college, but I got to imagine you're starting to see a little bit of separation from people who maybe aren't as disciplined, aren't as tough. What are some of the things you've seen wrestling give you at this young age you're at there?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with a lot about what Ryan said about teaching determination and grit and being able to stay focused, because there's nothing like wanting to eat a sandwich really bad, but you can't because you're like 0.1 underweight. But like, I mean, my dad says it all the time, like businesses love wrestlers because they know how to get after it. Like they're good employees, like they know how to work hard and this and that. So I think definitely like being used to putting in the work and doing things that nobody else wants to do has helped me out a lot. But probably like the most grateful thing I'm thankful for as far as wrestling goes is just like the connections I've made with people over the past like 14 years of wrestling. Like I think I met probably my best friend from wrestling. It's actually a funny story. When I was like 5 years old, I accidentally hit a kid in the head with a golf club. And then like 2 years later, I walk into my first wrestling practice ever, and he was like the first kid I saw. I'm like, hey, like I remember you. And then like now we're best friends. So like, and you go anywhere and like you find out somebody wrestled, like that's like automatically something you could talk about with them. Like I don't think I would be as close to Ryan as I am right now, like if I didn't know that he wrestled or if I never wrestled. So yeah.
Yeah, immediately you're throwing a Russian on him, you're throwing an underhook on him,
Yeah.
you're trying to size him up a little bit. There's a great video where it's like the wrestler handshake, you know, is it like the, you know, they show the normal handshake, then, you know, maybe it's like a slap hug to a bear hug or so that's always going to be there. And it's like you said, you could be anywhere and you meet someone who wrestled and it's like 4 hours later, you know?
Yeah.
Awesome, guys. Well, it's been a lot of fun to have you on. Thank you so much for your time. I know you guys are very busy. Like I said, we'll plan on getting this podcast out today. And yeah, it's been a lot of fun, guys. Thank you.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Ryan.
Awesome. Thank you for having us.
If you want to circle back, Ryan, I'm happy to use my lab funds. I think that's a really great idea. I think it'd be neat if we found a few Iranian wrestlers who own businesses and we could do maybe a joint, almost quick episode with my lab and Wrestling Changes, you know, my life with your program.
Yeah.
And I'm happy to flip the bill for our flights because I don't know about travel. If you know about travel to Iran and you can help me navigate that, I'm happy to pay for our flights and hotels.
I can help you navigate that. Yeah.
Okay. I think that'd be fun. And we could maybe just, I've got the film equipment and we bring a student, maybe it's Marshall, he can help us film.
Yeah.
And, you know, it'd be fun to release it. I think it'd be cool to release, you know, maybe a fun thing we can co-host, talk with wrestlers who own businesses in Iran and we can maybe release it on your Instagram page and it could be a joint thing with my lab.
That'd be really cool. No,
yes, think about it.
I will. No, thank you. I think we should take that further because that sounds like sounds right up my alley.
Okay, cool.
Marshall, you're in for it. You're committed.
Yeah, I'm ready to go. I'm ready
Can
to
you
go.
hold the camera?
Yeah, I got it.
Awesome.
Right, cool.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks,
Have a
guys.
great one. Thank you so much for listening to Wrestling Changed My Life. Please support our sponsor, Spartan Combat, by going to SpartanCombat.com and enter to win the Kyle Dake wrestling shoes. For all past episodes, go to WrestlingChangeMyLife.com. And if you enjoyed this episode, please leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or rate the podcast on Spotify. We'll see you next time. We'll see you next time. We'll see you next time. We'll see you next time.